Welcome to Chapter 8, The Muscular System. In this chapter, we'll explore one of the most important systems in your body, the muscular system. So, muscles are the tissues responsible for movement, posture, and even internal functions like digestion and pumping blood. There are over 600 muscles in your body, and they work continuously, whether you're lifting weights, whether you're blinking your eyes, or even breathing while you sleep. In this lecture, we're going to dive into the three types of muscle tissue, being skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. We'll talk about the structure and function of the skeletal muscles. We'll talk about how muscles contract and produce movement. We're going to look at key terms like actin and myosin and the neuromuscular junction. And finally, we'll learn the names and locations of major muscles in your body. So let's go ahead and get ready to see what powers every move that you make. Okay, before we continue, let's go ahead and move on to the objectives and dive a little deeper into what we will be covering. So let's look at what we're going to cover in this chapter. Again, this unit's all about the muscular system, not just how muscles help us move, but how they are built, how they work, and how they respond to different types of stress and activity. So by the end of this session, you should be able to, or you will be able to understand the basics of muscle tissue. So, what muscles are, what they do, and how they differ from one another. You'll also be able to describe the structure of a skeletal muscle, including the connective tissue layers and the microscopic components like the myofibrils or the sarcomeres. We're also going to look at explaining skeletal muscle contraction down to the molecular level. So this includes, again, actin, myosin, and the sliding filament theory. We'll explore muscular responses like hypertrophy, atrophy, different types of contractions like isotonic and isometric. We'll compare smooth muscle and cardiac muscle to skeletal muscle, and you'll want to know where each type is found, what they look like, and how they behave. And then finally, we'll wrap it all up by learning to identify major skeletal muscles of the human body by name, by location, and by function. So each of these objectives builds your foundation not just for the exam you'll be taking in this section, but for understanding how your entire body moves and functions every single day. So let's go ahead and get started with the introduction to muscle tissue. So first, I want to start off by saying one of two things, and the first one is that this recorded lecture is not a substitute for reading the book or reading the chapter, and it is also not a substitute for attending class, the live session class, and interacting with your instructor and asking questions. Okay? So this is just meant to give you a highlight of everything that you should know in the chapter. So let's go ahead and get started. And let's begin by understanding what the muscular system actually is, which is what the second thing was that I was going to mention. So muscles are more than just tissue that help you lift weights. They're organs, and they're made of specialized cells that can generate force. That means that they have the built-in ability to contract or shorten in response to a stimulus. And this contraction is what produces movement. Now, think about all the things you do that involve motion. So, as we see here in the slide, examples are walking, speaking, even breathing, um, even the things that you don't control consciously, like your heart pumping blood, or your intestines digesting food, or other things like that. They're all powered by muscles. That's the power of the muscular system. It's not just about strength or appearance or aesthetics, it's about life sustaining functions. So we categorize all this motion into three main types of muscles. So we have a skeletal muscle, and that helps control voluntary movement. So again, used for body movement. We have smooth muscle, which lines your organs and blood vessels. And then cardiac muscle, which, like the name sounds, is found only in the heart, and that's responsible for your heartbeat. So as we move forward on this presentation, keep in mind, like every heartbeat, every breath, every blink is a muscular action. Let's now take a closer look at the structure of a skeletal muscle. So as I said before, there are over 600 skeletal muscles in the human body. Some are big, like your quadriceps or your gluteus maximus, and others are small, like the muscles that move your fingers or your eyelids. Even though they come in all these shapes and sizes, they're all built from the same three core components. So first we have the connective tissue coverings, and these are the layers that wrap the tissue, right? Tissue wrap. They support each part of the muscle from the outer surface down to the individual cell. And you'll hear terms in the future slides like fascia, epimysium, perimysium, endomysium, and we'll break that down with a diagram um, in more detail later. The next thing we have is the muscle fibers, and these are the actual cells that do the work of contraction. And they're long, they're cylindrical, they're packed with microscopic proteins called myofibrils. Uh, these give muscles its striated appearance and its power. And finally, we have the neuromuscular junction mentioned on this slide. Again, this presentation is not a substitute for reading the book. Right? This neuromuscular junction, it's the connection point between the nervous system and the muscle. It's where a motor neuron sends a signal to the muscle fiber and it tells it when to contract. So these three components, the tissue coverings, the muscle fibers, and the nerve muscle connection, they all work together to give skeletal muscle its incredible strength, its coordination, its control. Right? So let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit more and move on to connective tissues on the next slides and see how they organize a muscle from the outside in. So to understand how a muscle is organized, we need to start off with its connective tissue covering. So think of them as the packaging and the structural support layers for your muscles. So we're going to break them down here by terms, and then we'll look at some images later. So the outermost layer is the fascia. This is a dense connective tissue that surrounds entire muscles, and it separates them from neighboring muscles. It holds the muscles in position and connects it to its surrounding tissues. And just beneath the fascia is what's called the epimysium. This is a layer that wraps around the whole skeletal muscle like a protective sleeve. It blends right into the fascia to provide extra strength and durability. And together, this fascia and epimysium or epimysium, they help anchor the muscle. They prevent friction or reduce friction with other tissues, and they help give the muscle its shape. These layers aren't just structural; they also help channel force when the muscle contracts, and carry blood vessels and nerves into the muscle so it can function properly. Um, that's it for this slide. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, where we're going to talk about how muscles are divided into smaller and smaller units by more connective tissue layers, creating a highly organized system. Okay, now that we've talked about the outer layers of the muscle, let's move one level deeper inside the muscle structure. So once the whole muscle is wrapped in the epimysium, it's divided further into bundles called fascicles. So each fascicle is a group of muscle fibers, also called muscle cells, and they're bundled together. So think of a fascicle like a handful of uncooked spaghetti, and each strand is a muscle fiber, and the whole handful is a fascicle. Surrounding each fascicle is another layer of connective tissue, and this is called the perimysium. This layer does two really important things. It separates muscle fibers into functional units so they can contract in a coordinated way, and it also allows different parts of the muscle to move independently without interfering with each other. This arrangement, uh, it not only adds structure and protection, but it also allows precision and fine motor control, and, and specifically in muscles like your fingers. And it helps with the power in larger muscles like your quads or your deltoids. So understanding fascicles it's key to understanding how muscles are both strong and flexible. Now let's bring all those layers we just talked about into focus using the diagram here of a skeletal muscle. So at the top left, we see the bone, and this is where the muscle connects. And that connection happens through the tendon, which is that white rope-like structure you see there. And tendons are made of tough connective tissue that attach muscle to bone. So just beneath the tendon, wrapping around the entire muscle, you'll see the epimysium or epimysium. And this is that outer covering of the whole muscle that we mentioned earlier. Inside the muscle, it's divided into the fascicles, right? Those circular bundles grouped together. And each fascicle is wrapped into the perimysium or bioperimysium. And you'll see it's labeled there above the large central bundle, but this diagram doesn't do a really good job of illustrating the um, the epimysium, right? Um, it just points to the outer layer of the muscle, but imagine a covering there. And with each, let's go back to the fascicle. So within each fascicle, we find the individual muscle fibers, and these are also called the muscle cells. So muscle cells, each muscle cell is wrapped in endomysium, right? The deepest layer of connective tissue, and it gives each fiber its own protective sleeve. You can also see on this diagram blood vessels weaving their way through the tissue, and these deliver oxygen, nutrients to keep the muscles healthy and functional. And what else do we see on this slide? Well, if we look at it from the outside in, the organizational structure, we see the whole muscle, the fascicles, to individual fibers with connective tissue supporting and connecting each of those levels. And this organization is what allows muscles to generate powerful, precise, coordinated movements, whether you're sprinting or you're typing on your phone. So spend some time studying this diagram without the labels and see if you can label it without, looking at the labels. And then go one step further and see if you can draw this diagram by memory without looking at it and explain it to another student. If you can explain this to somebody who's not taking this particular course and explain the function and physiology of this, you have a good understanding of it. And now that we've worked our way through the connective tissue layers, let's focus on what's inside those fascicles, which are the skeletal muscle fibers themselves. So each muscle fiber is actually a single elongated cell. It's long, thin, cylindrical shaped, with rounded ends. Unlike most cells in your body that we've talked about so far, muscle fibers are multinucleated, meaning they have more than one nucleus to support their size and their activity. So these cells have a unique job compared to other cells, right? They exert a pulling force when stimulated by a nerve, and when that stimulation ends, the muscle fiber relaxes. And this on-off ability to contract is what creates body movement as it pulls against uh, bones. So inside each muscle fiber, you have thousands of microscopic threads, and we call these threads myofibrils. And these are like the engines of the muscle contraction. Myofibrils are made up of protein filaments, two specific filaments named actin, and actin is the thin filament that you'll see in the diagram. And you can kind of think of, if you think of the word tin, actin, thin, it's not sounds like thin. You can maybe use that to remember that actin are the tiny filaments, and then myosin is the other one, the thick filaments, right? So these filaments, they slide past each other when the muscles contract, and it's a process that we'll look at more in detail when we study what's called the sliding filament theory. It's these overlapping filaments that give skeletal muscle its characteristic striations, that striped appearance, right? So again, to sum up this slide, the fiber is the cell. Myofibrils are the working parts inside that make up the muscle and allow the movement to happen. Okay, here we have a microscopic view of actual skeletal muscle fibers, right? This image here, it kind of brings to life everything that we've just talked about. So the long pink strands are the actual muscle fibers, and each one is a single giant cell. Notice that the dark purple spots lined up along the edges, if you see those are the nuclei. So remember that skeletal muscle fibers are multinucleated, like I said in the last slide. Again, that just means that they have multiple nuclei to help manage their large volume and high activity level. Now, let's take a look at the fine alternating light and dark bands that you see there running across the fibers. Those are the striations, right? They're caused by the precise alignment of actin and myosin filaments inside the fibrils. And we kind of mentioned already what actin and myosin is in theory. We haven't actually shown you a diagram of it yet. Actin being those thin fibrils and the myosin being those thick filaments. Right? So anyway, these striations they're not just for show, right? They're what make up skeletal muscle. It's what makes skeletal muscle unique, right? So the striations are what allow muscles to contract efficiently and with strength. So every time that you flex like your bicep or you tap your foot or even when you smile, uh, these same striped fibers are the ones working at creating that movement. Okay, now we arrive at the most critical connections in your body, and that's the neuromuscular junction. So this is the exact point where your nervous system and muscular system meet. That's where the nerve tells the muscle, hey, it's time to move. So let's go ahead and break this down. So first we have the motor neurons. These are specialized nerve cells whose job is to stimulate skeletal muscle fibers. So think of them as messengers that carry signals from your brain or your spinal cord out to the muscles. The place where a neuron connects to another, whether it's a muscle fiber or another neuron, we call that the synapse. And it's not a physical connection, but it's a gap, a small gap across which signals have to jump across. Right, so to send that signal, the neuron releases what are called neurotransmitters. These are chemical messengers that travel across the synapse and bind to receptors on the muscle cells, and that triggers a response. In this particular case, it triggers contraction. And the specific synapse between a motor neuron and a muscle fiber is what we call that neuromuscular junction. And this junction is the starting line of every intentional movement that you make, from raising your eyebrows to running a marathon, neither of which I can do. Um, and again, in the next slides, we're going to go and explore exactly what that signal uh, or how that signal causes that muscle fiber to contract. Let's see what actually causes a muscle to contract. So inside each muscle fiber, we have myofibrils, which are loaded with actin and myosin, the two kinds of protein filaments. And these filaments interact like gears in a machine. So when a muscle contracts, myosin pulls on actin. It causes a sliding action, which shortens the entire myofibril, which in turn shortens the muscle fiber, and then that pulls on the tendon attached to the bone, and that creates movement. Right. So when you curl a dumbbell, if you know what that is, working out, right, you're actually shortening the myofibrils in your bicep, and you're pulling your forearm up. A little more complex than that, but um, just to give you an idea what's going on. But how do we even start this process? So again, it begins back at the neuromuscular junction. So when a motor neuron releases a neurotransmitter called, in this case, acetylcholine, right? It's abbreviated capital A, capital C, little h for short. Acetylcholine binds to receptors on the muscle fiber's surface, and then it starts a chain reaction that leads to a contraction. So let's go and do a little quick summary of this. One, the signal comes from the brain. Two, it travels down a motor neuron. Three, acetylcholine is released at that neuromuscular junction. Four, that triggers actin and myosin to slide past each other. And then five, you get muscle contraction. Again, that's the simplified, super simplified kindergarten version of it. It's a lot more complex than that. But that's kind of what you need to have an idea of for right now. We're going to go ahead and dig into the mechanism a little bit further. We're going to talk about what's called the sliding filament theory in the next couple of slides. So muscles don't all work at the same time, the same way, and that's because they're made up of different kinds of fibers, right? So each is suited to a specific type of movement. And we have two types, right? Two primary types. One is fast and one is slow, and that's kind of where we get the names fast, fast twitch fibers, and slow twitch fibers. Right? The actual contraction of a filament, we call it a twitch. That's where the word twitch comes from. So fast twitch fibers, right? Or you can just call them fast fibers. They're built for speed and they're built for power, for intensity. And these fibers contract quickly, they generate a lot of force, but they also fatigue quickly. So um, you rely on fast fibers for like explosive movements like sprinting, jumping, lifting, heavy weights, things like that. Slow twitch fibers, right? These slow fibers, they're made more for endurance and they contract more slowly, but they can keep going for long periods of time without tiring. And these are the fibers that you're going to use for distance running, your posture, holding, standing up straight every moment, or sitting up straight, cycling. So, for an example, if you have an Olympic sprinter, they're going to naturally have more fast twitch fibers, while a marathon runner is going to have a lot more slow twitch fibers. Um, but both athletes still use both types in every single movement. They just have more of one over the other. So this balance kind of allows your muscles to adapt to different tasks. You can either work for power, endurance, or kind of anything in between. All right. Okay, let's look at skeletal muscle contraction. So muscles are incredibly responsive uh, to how often we use them, or how little we don't use them. Right. So we're going to talk about two key terms that describe how muscles physically change. I sound like Popeye there. That's just a good analogy. Muscles physically change based on activity. So we're going to talk about hypertrophy and atrophy. Right? Hypertrophy, atrophy. So the first one is muscular hypertrophy, and this happens when muscles are used frequently and forcefully, like during strength training or intense physical activity. The muscle fibers, they adapt. They'll increase in size. They'll increase in strength. Again, working out harder every day, and you get stronger every day, right? So you literally build bigger, more powerful muscles. And on the other hand, if a muscle isn't used because, let's say, of an injury or inactivity or maybe disease, it undergoes what's called atrophy, and that means that the muscle shrinks, it becomes smaller, weaker, it becomes less capable of producing force. And you can see this in people who've worn a cast or they've been bedridden for a very long time, or people who have a job that's very sedentary. Right? They don't move very much. The images that we see here in the slide, they show both. On the left, a comparison between a normal and an atrophied muscle. And on the right, you see the hypertrophied bicep compared to one at rest. Just remember that muscles are dynamic, right? They grow stronger if you challenge them, and they weaken if you neglect them. So what you do daily has a direct effect on your muscular system. All right, types of muscle contractions. Let's talk about how muscles generate force, not just when they move, but even when they don't. So there are two primary types of muscle contractions, and both play an important role in everyday life, everyday movement. And the first one we're going to talk about on this slide is the isotonic contraction. This is what we usually think of when we picture movement, right? So, an isotonic contraction, the muscles shorten while generating some kind of force. And the perfect example is like the bicep curl. Right? Your muscles shorten as you lift up the weight. Then there's the other one, the isometric contraction. And here the muscle generates force, but it doesn't shorten. So a good example is holding a weight still at your side. So you're using strength to keep it up, even though your arm isn't moving. And here's a takeaway: most real life movements are a combination of both of these types. Think about walking up a hill. So your leg muscles, your leg muscles, they shorten right as you step, and that's the isotonic. But they also stabilize your body without movement as you balance, and that's the isometric part of it. So understanding the difference helps in fitness training. It'll help in occupational therapy for like rehabilitation, sports medicine, or even not just for rehabilitation, but for improvement, right? Improving sports performance. So it's not just whether the muscle moves, but it's how it responds under different types of tension. Look at some visualization for muscle responses and contractions. So in this slide, uh, it visually reinforces what we just covered about muscle contractions. On the left, you see an example of a muscle. I don't know why I keep saying muscle. A muscle shortening as the arm flexes, and this is a classic isotonic contraction. The biceps, they're actively pulling the forearm upward, and you can see the belly of the muscle bulge and shorten in that process. On the right, the arm is in a fixed position. The bicep muscle is engaged and it's holding tension, but the arm isn't moving. And this is what we call the isometric contraction. The muscle is generating a force, but it's not changing in length. Both types of contractions are super important, right? Isotonic is for movement, isometric is for stability and posture. So think of how your arms and your core work when you carry a grocery bag. You lift it with isotonic motion, then you hold it steady with the isometric control. And this image shows you how complex and efficient your muscular system really is. Every single movement is a combination of shortening, stabilizing, and adjusting in real time. Let's continue with smooth muscle, right? Let's take a look at smooth muscle, which is quite different from skeletal muscle that we've been looking at earlier. Smooth muscle cells, they're elongated with tapering ends. You can look at the image in your book, right? They're often described as spindle shaped. That means that they're kind of like fat in the middle and they kind of taper off at the ends. Um, yeah, think of like not a teardrop, but a teardrop that has tapered ends on both sides, right? So they lack striation like skeletal muscle. So if you look at it under a microscope, they appear smooth. That's where they get the name. And smooth muscle is involuntary, meaning you don't consciously control it. It's found in places like the walls of blood vessels, the digestive tract, the bladder, the uterus. Um, and there are two main types of smooth muscle, right? The multi-unit smooth muscle and the visceral smooth muscle. So in the multi-unit smooth muscle, in this type, the cells are separate and they're not arranged in sheets. Each cell acts independently. An example would be the muscles in your eyes, which control the pupil or the lens. Visceral smooth muscle, this is the more common type. The cells are organized into sheets and they're connected to each other so they can contract as a unit. And this type is found in the walls of hollow organs like the stomach or the intestines. But together, these smooth muscles manage things like moving food through your digestive tract, controlling blood flow, and regulating internal pressure. They work silently and constantly to keep you alive. Let's jump into smooth muscle and a concept called peristalsis. Let's take a closer look at how visceral smooth muscle functions, specifically through a process that we call peristalsis. So if you look at the diagram, the top image shows a multi-unit smooth muscle, and that's where cells are more independent and scattered, like in your eyes. And the bottom image shows the visceral or single-unit smooth muscle, and that's where the cells are closely connected and they can contract as a group. And here's where peristalsis comes in. So peristalsis, what is it? It's a wave-like series of muscle contractions that moves the content of certain hollow organs. So imagine when you're eating a peanut butter sandwich, and sometimes the peanut butter sandwich is so dry, it's not going down your throat very, smoothly. There's peristalsis movement that's actually pushing that piece of peanut butter sandwich down. I'm saying that because that's happened to me a couple of times when ate, I took too big of a peanut butter sandwich bite. Right. So in this case, it pushes the food through the GI tract. It also works through the intestines. Other things is like urine through your ureters also gets moved by the peristaltic movement. And this wave motion is made possible because visceral smooth muscle cells are linked by what are called gap junctions. And these allow the contraction signal to travel from one cell to the next, kind of like a stadium wave. Have you seen? Yeah, I'm not a big sports fan, but when they do the wave, I know how to do the wave. when one person stands up and they sit back down, and that wave moves all the way across, something like that, right? So it's an automatic rhythmic process. It's controlled by the autonomic nervous system, meaning that you don't have to think about it. It just happens when I say autonomic nervous system. But without peristalsis, digestion wouldn't move forward. Blood flow wouldn't move properly in some vessels, and then your body's internal transportation system would just come to a halt. So even though smooth muscle works quietly behind the scenes, its impact is huge. In fact, I just read one of those one of those drugs that people take to lose weight. I can't remember the types of drugs. Um, what it does is it actually slows down the peristalsis movement within the intestines, so it makes you feel fuller, right? So you don't evacuate so often, and so it kind of keeps you from eating too much, or people get sick when they try to eat what they normally eat. And one of the things it does is it slows down the movement of food through your digestive tract. I can't remember the name of the drugs. I probably shouldn't even say the names of the drugs on the recording. So move on to cardiac muscle. I think we can know what that is by the name of it. We're going to focus on this third type of tissue. Again, cardiac muscle is found only in the heart, nowhere else in the body, and its job is to keep your heart pumping blood 24 hours a day, every day, for your entire life. Structurally, cardiac muscle is unique. It does have striations like skeletal muscle. Uh, that helps with like strong coordinated contractions, but it's also made of these interconnected network of cells. And these cells are linked by structures that we call intercalated discs. You can see those pointed out. Oh, they're not pointing them out in the picture, but you can identify them there in the picture. Uh, what these connections allow is they allow the heart to contract as a unit. So um, it allows us the units to work together in a synchronous motion. And that's kind of what's important about the heart tissue. If you're moving blood through several chambers and through valves, you need to have things synchronized. Okay? So cardiac muscle is involuntary. That means, again, you don't have to control it consciously. It's rhythmic. It means it produces its own steady beat. And though it can be adjusted through the nervous system and through hormones. But on the image on the slide here, you can see that we have a zoomed in section of cardiac muscle fiber. And you can see these striations like skeletal muscle. But the cells branch and connect in like this web-like network, and that allows the heart to function as like a coordinated pump. So while skeletal muscles move your body, and smooth muscles move your organs. I was going to say why skeletal muscles, musculoskeletal, meaning the skeleton and the muscles, move your body, because you need both systems. Smooth muscle would move your organs, right? Cardiac muscle keeps your entire circulatory system running, again, all day, every day, without rest. Now let's go ahead and finish off this presentation with major skeletal muscles, right? We've arrived at that final section of the muscular system, where we could look at the major skeletal muscles of the human body. And what we see here on this slide with no labels is a full body view of the muscular system from both the front, which is anterior, and the back, the posterior, views. And these are the muscles responsible for voluntary movement, posture, stabilization. And I'm going to highlight a few of these here without the labels. And then we have another slide that we do have the labels so you can focus on what will be on your exam. But if you look from the front, right, anteriorly, you can see the deltoid, which is the rounded shoulder muscle that lifts the arm. The pectoralis major, which is the chest muscle that helps move the upper arm. The biceps brachii, that's the front of the upper arm that flexes the elbow. You have the rectus abdominis, that's your abs, right? Those are used for core strength and posture. We can see the quadriceps group there from the front of the thigh. Again, we use those for walking and kicking. And we can also see the tibialis anterior, which is the front of the lower leg that lifts the foot. Again, those are just some. And if you look at the image that's looking posteriorly or from the back, we can identify the trapezius, which is the upper back, right? It moves the shoulders and neck. the latissimus dorsi, which is that large mid-back muscle. It helps pull the arms down. You can see the triceps brachii, which is the back of the upper arm that extends the elbow, which does the opposite of the biceps brachii. Right? You have the gluteus maximus, the main buttock muscle, right, responsible for hip extension. We have the hamstrings, which is the back of the thigh, and that's used to bend the knee. And we can also see the gastrocnemius, which we call the calf muscle, calves, right? People work out their calves. And that helps you push off when walking. So every movement from whether you're smiling or you're sprinting, I know we're not talking about facial muscles here, they depend on these muscles working in a coordinated way. Um, in your lab or your exam, you're going to be expected to identify these by name and location and possibly know their main functions. Again, use a diagram like this to quiz yourself. Cover the names, try to label them from memory, muscle by muscle. Now, this is a good one because it has no labels on it. I'm going to show you another one that does have the labels. I want to thank you if you've made it this far on the recording. We're going to finish off with this labeled diagram of the major skeletal muscles. This is the final slide. And again, I'm giving you the complete labeled view of the major skeletal muscles, both anterior from the front and posterior from the back of the body, as we saw in the previous slide. Now, these are the muscles you'll be expected to recognize and label on the tests or in labs or maybe during some clinical application. So let's go ahead and start the review of each one of these. So from the front or the anterior view, we have labeled the sternocleidomastoid, and that turns and flexes the head. We have the deltoid, again, that lifts the shoulder and arm. The pectoralis major, that pulls the arm across the chest. If you've ever worked out, so some of these might be, these are like the workout muscles that people use to build up and look good. All right. We have the next one is the biceps brachii and the brachioradialis. Both of those are used to flex the elbow. Next, we have the rectus abdominis and the external obliques. I just worked out my external obliques this morning, my workout, and they flex the spine and they rotate the torso. We have the adductor longus, that's ADD, adductor longus, and that brings the thigh inward. So ADD, maybe bringing something toward. Ab, like AB or abd, like abduct, taking something away. But this is adductor longus. Again, knowing that that's in the leg, brings the thigh inward. We have the rectus femoris. That's part of the quadriceps group that extends the knee. And then we have the tibialis anterior, which raises the foot, and the gastrocnemius, which helps point a toe and push off while walking. You might hear these called what do they call them? The gastrocs? I can't remember. People at the gym have like short names for all of these. Like gastrocs. They'll say the name, but they'll say it sort of shortened. All right, let's go look at the back view, the posterior view. We have the occipitalis, right? That moves the scalp. We have the trapezius, which moves the shoulders and extends the neck. We have the deltoid and the triceps brachii. Remember, we mentioned the triceps brachii, which works against the biceps brachii, so it provides balance. But the deltoid and triceps brachii move the arm and they extend the elbow, as where the biceps brachii and the brachioradialis flex the elbow. We have the latissimus dorsi that pulls the arms down and back. This is that one gigantic muscle that bodybuilders really work out and gives them that V look, you know. We have the gluteus medius and the gluteus maximus on this slide, and those are used for stabilization and hip extension. Biceps femoris and the semitendinosus. This is part of the hamstrings, and they're used to bend the knee. And what we're seeing, what's also labeled here is soleus and the calcaneal tendon or the Achilles tendon, right? That assist in standing and walking. So again, use this slide as a practice tool. Cover the labels, quiz yourself, say the name and function out loud so you can hear it. Don't just say it internally with your internal monologue. Also, try drawing and labeling the muscles from memory. So don't even like once you know where all the muscles are at and you can identify them by the let's say the pointers without the labels. then try to draw this, like sketch it. Doesn't have to be like, you don't have to be an artist. Just kind of give a sketch and also label them yourself, right? So this is going to be your map to understanding human movement. Every step, every lift, every breath starts here. Sorry, I was going to go into a song. But thank you very much for listening to this lecture on muscular skeletal muscles. And I will see you in class where we will go into more detail and I'll be able to answer any questions you have from the energetics of the muscles and why fast twitch and slow twitch work the way they do, to how the, yeah, I'll answer all your questions.